Hello, innovators. I am Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator. Today we're talking with Kareem Mostafa, the CEO and co-founder of Tribetactics. Love the name too, by the way. We'll have to talk about that and hear a little bit. You're a content creator and a repurposer. Thank you for joining me on the Polymath podcast.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Dustin. Really looking forward to our chat today.
Me too. And this is a show about becoming a poly-innovator, so please say hello to the innovators in the audience.
Hello, guys. hope you'll find value in today's episode, and yeah, really excited to jump right in with you.
Yeah, and I think that we're going to probably be giving some innovative ideas around content repurposing, I feel like. So when I first came across your website, I actually loved the idea and quickly booked a call to talk with you. And from what I recall, we had a really engaging conversation. So it makes me even more excited for this one too.
Yeah, I'm
And
honored.
so, yeah, and I took your course around the same time as well. And so I had bought the book pretty quickly, I think, and I was able to read it during the time that I was researching you. And so I got to finish before the interview. So that's good. We can talk about that. And I thought it was really good. And I want to ask you, what inspired you just right off the bat to write it?
The book itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like it's interesting, man, because like we kind of set up the company and then we realized that there's not a lot of people that understand this notion of creating episodic content, this notion of creating to the best of your ability, like Netflix style binge-worthy content, if you will. And yeah, we just noticed a gap in the market and we thought, you know what, this is more than just like a blog post or two. This could be a really good opportunity for a book.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's basically where the idea came. Selfishly, I've always wanted to do a book, to be honest, but like
Yeah.
I just felt like, you know what, this is the perfect opportunity to kind of like do two productive things at once. And it was pretty daunting at first, but like bit by bit, like the book slowly came together. I also use like really big fonts which helped get the page count up.
Yeah.
Just kidding, but yeah, no, it was a good experience overall.
Well, and just I didn't even have that question planned, but I was curious about it. And I think it's interesting too with the episodic series-based content. It makes
Mhm.
it much easier for people to make a consistent baseline. And then you can build the pillars like books and courses off of that. I think that's very important detail for people to know.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, like exactly as you said, Dustin, like I think that, you know, um, as marketers or anybody like creating content these days, I don't think it's like a marketer's job. It's anyone. I like to think of it as like dollars or euros. Like content is a currency. It's like it's how you not just do business, it's how you communicate. If I send a WhatsApp message to like my friend, like that's some form of content, one could argue.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when you're doing it for like in a professional sense, like, okay, you need content to get brand awareness for like a project that you're working on, or you need content to generate, let's say, more sales for whatever you're working on, business development. You get into this like hamster wheel of like, okay, I came up with a cool content idea, but now I have to go on to the next one, on to the next one. And it could be pretty, I always think of like a hamster wheel image in my mind when I think of that, because we're just putting ourselves under like so much stress to always try to think of something like completely like brand new, as opposed to coming up with a premise for a show. I think, as you alluded to, where like you no longer have to deal with the agony of like, oh my god, what am I going to come up with next. Really, you've already created some form of a show, and so you're just looking at like every new piece of content is just a new episode in something that's much larger than that, and every episode makes the overall show better, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and the big kind of theme I'm getting is that it's a matter of making consistency not as hard to achieve. So Gary Vee always talks about document over create. And I don't really like the document philosophy because I like creating. I'm a creative. I'm sure you probably are too in this case. And it's one of those things where it's fun to create more than it is to document for me personally. And I think that the whole reason why a philosophy exists is to help people stay more consistent. And episodic series is kind of an alternative to that, where you're creating something that'll help you stay consistent. And with the things like pillars like books and courses and webinars, anything big like that, it's almost like that hamster levels up a little bit, gets a little bit stronger. I can churn that wheel just a little bit faster.
Yeah, I suppose that's certainly like one way to look at it, and yeah, like ultimately you're just trying to create efficiencies for
Mhm.
yourself, which I think is one of the the core like messages behind what you preach, I think.
Yeah, well, I think that's awesome too, because it's also about you're saying it's a currency, and as creators and marketers, we're creating that currency through the content and the algorithms of the various platforms like Instagram, YouTube. They're paying us back with just getting more views and getting more like watch time, or just people seeing our stuff. And the more consistent you are, like with a series or something like that, the more that money's worth, basically.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
100%, yeah, because you're building brand, and you're building, something that is really, I'm trying to think of a good analogy here. You know, ultimately, that's the one thing that is so hard to replicate, like who you are, what you stand for as a brand. A lot of people think, oh yeah, I need to work on my brand, but it's pretty fuzzy, it's pretty vague. Like, oh yeah, brand is important, but nobody knows how to actually operationalize that, or what that is. Like, what is the brand beyond like a logo and a domain name? And
Mm-hmm.
we suggest that, hey, well, why don't you do a show? Why don't you do a talk show, a documentary series, a reaction video series? And this could be a vehicle, because it's all about like what vehicle you're taking. Like, it could be a vehicle to help you express yourself,
Yeah.
so to speak. That's like saying, I'm a painter, but you've never really seen me paint anything. But then you give me a prompt, and you're like, okay, well, why don't you paint, I don't know, um, like pictures of like animals? And then it's like, okay, I'm gonna do that then. And through my pictures of animals, you get to like low-key kind of like see my painting skills. And
Yeah.
by the way, I don't know how to paint at all, but yeah, that's just an example.
Well, and some of the reasons why we're having this conversation just right off the bat is I wanted to give people who aren't used to the whole content world, who might be listening, an idea of what we're talking about. Because I think that everybody could benefit from this. And as the internet evolves, more and more people are going to need personal brands and content
Mhm.
creation to really stand out. So I think this episode is very important, not only for marketers like ourselves and people who like to create content, but even people who aren't necessarily in the space yet. So thank you for helping me explain it all.
Yeah, happy to help out for sure. But yeah, I completely agree with you. Like, I think that personal, especially now, man, right? Like, with the COVID like
Oh,
madness
yeah.
that's going on, a lot of people are resorting to building their own personal brands, as opposed to like just like, okay, well, what else can I add on my CV? They
Mhm.
decide, you know what, I'm gonna, like James Altucher would say, I'm not gonna wait to get picked. I'm gonna pick myself.
Mhm.
I'm gonna choose myself, and I'm going to decide to create a blog, or or a series of videos, or something else that I can kind of like put my brand name on it. I mean, if you think of, if I say the name to you, let's say Will John, you might be like, okay, well, that's just a regular name. But if I tell you Will Smith, you might
Mhm.
already think of something specific, right? Um, or Michael. I don't know, like Michael, Michael
Jordan,
John, or like
or
Michael Jordan. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So I mean, like, personal branding is kind of like that, where it's like, okay, like, uh, Dustin Miller, like that's, that becomes a brand name. Like, people actually feel a set of emotions when they hear that name, when
Mm.
because they recognize that is a brand. And right, like, don't even get me started on like the fashion world, right? Like, a lot of them
Oh
are like
yeah.
first and last names. And so people are, I think, realizing this amazing opportunity for them to really create their own brands. And again, it sounds like something super ambiguous, but it's really not. It could be as simple as you having, as you said, Dustin, like, a consistent um, creative project, which you use that as a vehicle to express yourself. And I mean, we come at it from like the video series and like the show creation side of things. But to be honest, there's many ways to achieve a similar effect, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, we'll go into that in some of the later questions too. And totally agree, Kareem. And I think that it's interesting because you're talking about how people using this time to build up the personal brand. And I had a guest on the show, Mark J. Draper. He was talking about how he helped someone at the beginning of the year. So before everyone really went on lockdown, at least here in the US, create a YouTube channel. She's like a personal trainer or a group fitness coach, which is actually something I do as a day job too.
Mhm.
And it's interesting how he helped her build a personal brand and YouTube channel way before the actual thing hit. And so by the time it hit, she already had a following online and was able to actually benefit from the actual lockdown versus being screwed over by it.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. Yeah, there you go.
There's this term that another person I had on talked about. It's called COVID resolution, where what are you using this time for to really kind of exemplify your life or change your life? Do you have any resolution per se?
Oh my God, a COVID resolution.
Yeah.
That is so awesome. I've never heard that before. I think that, it's, First of all, it's great. It's definitely the right attitude to take. I think people should look at like what opportunities they can get out of this,
Oh yeah, sure.
because like money and opportunity didn't just like disappear. I think it just shifted massively in one direction versus the other,
Hmm.
and people just need to recognize like what that direction is and what that means for them and how they can capitalize on it. But yeah, in terms of like me, COVID resolutions, now that you mention it, honestly, it's just to continue like growing our company, continuing to like just meet more people that could hopefully be better off after working with us or meeting meeting us. And beyond that, another like COVID resolution that's very like dear to me is to just get back to playing music. I used to be like really into like music, had a band and all that stuff. And ironically, like when I started like my like when we started like Tribetactics and everything, which is also obviously very interesting for us. But music kind of took like a back seat or like no seat even. And I
Yeah.
thought, you know what, maybe now that I have a bit more time, I'm not commuting, I'm not, wasting as much time, let's say, why don't I start to like do a bit of that? What about you? Do you have any COVID resolutions?
Really, for me, it was the interviews. And so at the start of the, like literally halfway through May, which is around the time that my city went on full lockdown, me and my roommate actually went on lockdown a little bit before that. I use this tool called matchmaker.fm to connect with people. It's a really cool podcaster and a podcast guest platform where people can match. And I started having guests sign up through that. And
Mm,
before that point, I had no idea how I was going to start doing interviews, but I know that at some point I wanted to. And so I started doing that, and I looked at the number for you, and you're my 38th guest, and it's only been about a couple months.
right.
So that's been
Amazing.
my resolution there, to just have more and more guests and see how many I can do in a short time, considering that everyone's a little bit more available, at least to a certain degree during this lockdown.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm definitely going to be checking out that website for sure.
Yeah, I'll send you a link.
Cool.
So you got your recent book, Tribe Tactics Company, and Chapcast going on, but what got you started before all that? What was your mindset?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think my yeah, well, okay, so let's see. I mean, I had a really good job before it, but being the stubborn person that I am, I couldn't help. Me and my brother, who's my co-founder, I partly blame him for this, but like, I couldn't help but feel that, you know what, what are the chances that we could actually build something ourselves and actually see it to fruition?
Mm-hmm.
We've always had this like entrepreneurial dream, entrepreneurial bug, and it's probably because before I started my corporate career, if you like, I had a startup that failed, catastrophically. I think
Oh,
I had a team of people. I was the youngest person on the team, and I was the CEO. Everybody else was older than me, and not just like old, like age wise, but they were just all like more experienced than me, um, and they all ultimately all quit on me just
oh,
because I wasn't like a good leader. I wasn't like able to get like a team together or have like a solid vision. I was like full of like passion and energy, but like it wasn't
was it channeled in a way?
thank you, yeah, it wasn't channeled. It wasn't, I was missing some experience basically, and as a result we weren't making any money. I think the whole year we ended the year with like, I want to say like less than like $1,500 like the whole year.
That's crazy. Yeah.
So it's pretty much us being like in zero or like in the negative more or less. And that's what prompted me to get a corporate job. And I didn't really like it. I actually hated it. I was
Mm-hmm.
always counting the days to go back to the startup world. But in the same time, I couldn't help but admit that I was learning so much by being in these larger companies. Because I just learned like what it means to, I don't know, like have an effective one-to-one with your, if like you're a manager and like you're like a direct report, like how do you actually manage that?
Mm-hmm.
Or how do you, like, I don't know, set goals? Or how do you, if somebody did something wrong, how do you course correct it but still make them like motivated and confident to continue on, as opposed to like totally crushing them, right?
Yeah.
So all these like skills, all these like nuanced skills that you couldn't help but that I personally couldn't learn unless I was in that environment. After doing that for just under like 5 years across two companies, I was in LinkedIn for a couple of years
And
and then in
HubSpot, I believe.
HubSpot.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Um, LinkedIn was good. HubSpot was great. It was my favorite company to work for, other than starting your own company.
Yeah.
But eventually, we were like, you know what? This was like 2 years ago. At this stage, we were like, you know what? Let's just go ahead and make this jump. Worst case scenario, we go back to getting jobs.
Yeah.
Best case scenario, we maybe start creating jobs, and thankfully, like the latter is starting to happen. So yeah, things are okay for now.
That's great. I was going to ask about your time at HubSpot too. I saw a whole bunch of certifications as well. It's funny because I took a lot
Yeah.
of the courses, but I never got around to finishing them. But the reason why is that I had already gone in knowing a lot of what was taught in it. And so
Well done.
thank you. But like the social media marketing one, for example, I remember getting like 80% of the way through. I was like, I'm bored now. So it's like, it's good. But they were really
It's
good
good
courses.
for your LinkedIn profile though, as you know, and all that
It
stuff.
really
Yeah.
is. Yeah, definitely.
Right.
And I was just going to say too, they're really good courses too. And I saw that you had a whole bunch of them. So I know that you went through them all too. For the
It's so
most part.
funny because we were like our job, like we were required to
Yeah.
get them done because we had to consult like customers and marketing agencies who are like HubSpot partners, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So people who are already at the top of their game are coming to us for, advice, so to speak, and
Yeah.
and so it's a lot of pressure, and so you really have to know your stuff so
You
that
really do.
you could do that. Yeah.
So far, I've actually just asked some of the introduction questions, and so I haven't actually got into any of the actual main questions just yet. So here's the
Oh, okay,
first
go for
one.
it.
Let's start off with the basics then. What is content marketing?
Okay, yeah, I mean, it really depends on who you ask. For me, as we were just saying, it really is a currency. It's gotten to the stage where it's not just a thing that marketers do. It really is a currency. It's a way of dealing with people. It's a way of expressing yourself and sharing, your message. It's as simple as that.
Thank you. I that's why I wanted to ask that, because I didn't necessarily picture it as a currency. I envisioned that, hey, I'm doing this to provide value, and currency is value. So like, I think I had the idea there, but it didn't click until you said it. So I'm glad I asked, and I think that's good that we haven't gotten to the questions yet. That means the introduction conversation was so good that we just kind of went over that. So that's perfect. And then what is the idea of this currency to you in particular then?
Hmm. Yeah, I guess it's just think of it as when I say currency, I mean I also mean it in the figurative sense, in the sense that it's like social currency. So like it's a way that you could really use. It's a thing that you could use to really build your brand and be known for what you do. Especially because if you go back to like classic like storytelling, I was actually googling this the other day, like what makes a great TV show. You should if you're ever like curious, you should definitely Google that, like just what makes a good TV show. And you see a lot of like really interesting articles, but they all come back to the main point, which is what makes good TV shows are great characters. And when I dug into that deeper, it's characters that have challenges, that have struggles, that have flaws, just like you and me. In other words, people who are relatable. So characters that are not like and that's why, like, in some cases, I was just going to say not like superheroes, but even as I think about it, even superheroes, some of our favorite superheroes, whether it's, I don't know, Batman or Superman or whoever, like diehard fans of those will be very quick to remind you of, like Superman and like Kryptonite, right?
Yeah.
Or same thing for Batman. So ultimately, it's all about how do you build yourself as a character, as a brand, that is relatable and that is not so like unbearably perfect, but rather quite the opposite, something that's open, vulnerable, and you don't do that in a sadistic way. You do that
Yeah.
as a way of reaching out to people and connecting with them.
Yeah, opening yourself up. That's how you build trust, is by opening up. And what's interesting is about that Superman comment is that they actually created Kryptonite because he got too powerful. He was too godly or out
There
of
you
reach
go.
for people. And so that's why DC was like, okay, we need something to bring him back down to earth. And I think that's really interesting there. And
Yeah, a lot of
then,
people spend, just a quick thing on that as well, like a lot
yeah,
of people feel that, oh, I'm not going to put something on until it's perfect. And as you and I know, because you're obviously an awesome content creator, you already know that like perfection is a myth. you know um it doesn't really exist. And even if it's something, even if you and I were to work on something together for like many months, and then we look at each other and we're like, you know what, I think it's perfect now. Well, guess what, as soon as it leaves the building, it's probably not perfect or perceived as perfect by somebody else,
mm-hmm.
thus it being a myth.
Yeah,
As a result, people should just post whatever, and well, not whatever, but they should focus on quantity. I'm a huge believer in quantity as a focus over quality.
mm-hmm.
And people say, oh no, quality over quantity. Well, I obviously care about quality as well. It goes without saying, but that's the whole point. Quality goes without saying, but in the same time, if you really start to study this topic, like academically, like one of the books that's great for that is by Adam Grant called Originals. And he talks about how some of the great creators, and like, you know, real like timeless creators, people
Da Vinci,
like Beethoven.
or
What's that?
Beethoven and Da
Yeah,
Vinci. Yeah.
exactly. And yeah, Da Vinci and others. I'll speak for Beethoven specifically because he had, I think it was Beethoven and Mozart, if I'm not mistaken. But he was just like talking about their life stories and saying that these guys put out a lot of terrible stuff, like hundreds and hundreds of terrible, flat out terrible songs, or symphonies, if you will. But it's that quantity, like you can't help but get better, right? You can, when you do something 100 times, like you can't help but get better, which is an amazing thing. If you go to the gym and you're not, you know, you're not putting in 100% every single day, okay?
Yeah.
And you're only going for like 15, 20 minutes. Now, I'm not an expert, but I do know that this works. The consistency will carry you. If you go for a walk every day, like even though every unit of whatever you're doing is not perfect in and within itself, the consistency of it makes you unfreaking stoppable. Do you agree?
Yeah. I'm a personal trainer, so I definitely agree.
Oh yeah. Sorry, of course.
No, you're
Yeah.
good. Sorry for interrupting you, by the way. I didn't mean to. I was like, I need to keep focused on active listening.
No, exactly. But yeah, so you can probably speak a bit more to that. But you know, it really is about like that compound effect. Another great book by Darren Hardy.
Yeah.
Like, you know, how do you do small things every day? Nothing remarkable, nothing too special, but it's the consistency of it. And I think the same thing goes for content. The last reference just on this is Roberto Blake.
Yeah, that's who I was going to mention too. Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, yeah, Roberto Blake. So so I don't know him personally, but he's an awesome YouTuber, and he made one video which is my favorite video by him, and the title of the video is I think it's "Make 100 Crappy Videos," and it's like him going on a rant saying, "I want you to create 100 crappy videos. I don't care if they average like 0 views or like 1 view. The goal is to not care about anyone at all in terms of like, oh my God, what are they going to think of me? And really just focus on getting that content out, like putting in the work, honing in on your craft." And I think that what I got from it is that by the end of those 100 videos, you can't help but you've become more confident on camera. You can't help but be a better whatever, like conversationalist, you know, so on and so forth.
Well, yeah, I definitely want to speak on this because it's interesting, because I was literally going to do the same example there with Roberto, because I was literally watching that video just like last week, I think it was. And he also
actually saw it.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I was going to mention him right before you were going to do it. It's like, perfect. I was like, we're on the same wavelength there. Because it's interesting because, like you said, making 100 videos. And there was even some kind of study done where they had this class of photography students. They asked them to make the most perfect photograph. And they told half the class to only make one photo and make it perfect. And then they asked they had a class to make tons of photos, like 100 photos. And then by the end of the semester, started their masterpiece, so to speak. And they found that the people who only had one photo, they spent so much time thinking about it and not actually practicing that they actually were pretty mediocre at the end. Some of them didn't even turn it in. And there was one of them that was okay, but it wasn't necessarily the greatest. And then the ones who actually practiced a lot learned from their mistakes and were able to make much better product at the end of the semester from that. And I also too realized that I actually am a perfectionist, like you were mentioning earlier. Perfectionism is a myth. I also had an issue with being on camera. I love being on stage, singing karaoke or something like that. And when I teach fitness classes, I'm basically on stage, but I couldn't do the camera for some reason. It was a real hindrance. And even for podcasts too, I couldn't get used to my ears for my audio for a while. Hearing my own voice was always really hard to do. But eventually when you do it more and more, like you're saying, getting that quantity out, you actually get past that hurdle. And I think that's very important for people to hear.
Totally, man. And I love that story you mentioned. It'd be great if you can send me a link to that, like just that research done on the photography students thing. That's very interesting because, I believe that, and I want to believe it as well. I want to believe that like when you do something enough, like you can't help but get better, and repetition makes, or at least it's kind of like self-actualization, right? Like perfectionism. You don't quite reach it, but you tend towards it. You aspire to it, so to speak.
Well, and one of my main goals in life is to become a polymath, which is the inspiration for the show, the Polymath Polycast. And I think that in this idea, it's almost striving for perfectionism, but it's not necessarily, if you don't get there, that's okay. Because it's like shooting for the moon and landing amongst the stars. You're going to get way farther along because you have this ambitious goal. And not having that goal, I think, is worse than being overly ambitious.
Totally. Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
So what's the difference between creating content and creating a show?
Okay, so content is pretty much all of the above, whether that's like video, audio, image, or written content, including video as well. Creating a show is more of a curated approach to it. Think of it as like making food or coming up with like a set menu. And so on that note, creating a show is one of my favorite quotes comes from IKEA, the furniture shop, and they say, limited spaces, unlimited creativity. And me and my wife, we live in like a super tiny apartment in the center of Dublin, over here, Dublin, Ireland. And we always like love to joke around about this, but we also like believe it so much that like, hey, like limited spaces, unlimited creativity. And I think I've actually like internalized that so much that now I bring it to this IKEA quote. I carry it with me in every aspect of life.
Awesome.
Same thing with content as well, in the sense that if I tell you, hey man, let's make some content, it's actually an extremely difficult task because it's like, oh my God, where do we start and where do we end? And I was listening to one of Matt Devella's podcast episodes yesterday. He's awesome filmmaker, YouTuber, and
Love him.
and he had some guys on, and they were basically talking about the fact that like when you introduce constraints, it makes life so much easier. To tell you, let's make content about animals and let's do it such that we can publish it tomorrow morning. Okay, so we don't have that much time. It has to be like quick and snappy, and it's got to be about animals, and we have to do it together. So now these are some constraints that are actually helping us. So creating a show is similar to that, where it's like, as opposed to like, oh my God, I have to create content every day or every week or every month. By creating a show, we like to think and we like to advocate that it's almost like this sense of relief that comes over you, because it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna create a show about what it takes to become like a polymath, and then figure out how can I bring people who can maybe add to that conversation, but the thinking, if I can call it that, the thinking has already been done, the structure has already been done. And now every episode that in this show only serves to compound its value and to make it more robust as such.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's what happened with this show in particular too, because after the first few episodes, I kinked out the structure, so to speak. I have the intro, like, hello, innovators, I'm Dustin Miller, and I introduced the guests. And I looked at different podcast, like information videos where they're like, hey, this is how you should structure your show. And I realized, okay, you need to introduce the guest and yourself so people know who they're listening to. Explain the topic in a way, which I tried to do. I'm not very good about that particular part yet. And then I asked an icebreaker question, which we kind of skipped over because the ice was already broken for the most part, which is good.
Sure, yeah.
And then I had the like mindset question, which just kind of gives a way for people to open up and feel relaxed. Then you have the questions, and then we have the call to action, and then like where people can find you, and boom, it's a nice structure right there they can follow. And it seems rigid, but because of that structure, it makes things feel much more flow in a way of our conversation, so we can get straight into the meat of it a lot quicker. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. Sorry, I was on mute there. Yeah, no, totally. And I think it's it just eliminates the decision making involved. These days I'm trying to play this game with myself. I realize that I take so many decisions, and I think I don't remember where I read it, but like I think it's different from willpower. I think it's like decision making power. It's why, like, this is like a cliche example, but like guys like Mark Zuckerberg and like the late Steve Jobs, like why they wear the same thing every day. It's because, or eat the same thing every day, or at least have someone else take care of it. It's because their decision-making power, like they don't want to spread that across, oh, how am I going to commute to work today? Oh, what am I going to dress? Like, what am I going to wear? What am I going to eat?
Yeah.
So on and so forth, such that, let's say, the 2 or 3 decisions that they really do make are like, boom, like super informed decisions, super like, sophisticated, rich as such. And so I always try and play this game with myself, even like, especially in things like outside life, like just to kind of build that muscle. So a simple example would be like, okay, in the weekend, let's say we want to do something different and go out to a restaurant or order in from a restaurant. Usually I would be, because I'm like a big like foodie and stuff, usually I'd be like, okay, here's like the 20 restaurants short list. Now let's narrow it down to like 10, 5, 1. Like, so like
So
too
much
much, you
energy.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And now I'm very happy to like get my friends or like my wife, you know, to make that decision. I'm like, what do you want to have, you know? And I'll
Yeah.
have whatever you have. And I train myself on two things. I train myself to be okay with the final decision, even if I didn't really want Asian and I could have preferred a pizza, but I'll just go with it. And
Mhm.
number two, the fact that, hey, like, you don't have to make all the decisions, because when you do make a decision, then you're yeah, it just you become more creative in that way. And I love the fact that you already have a structure to your episodes that you more or less follow, because it just makes it easier for you. And I like to think that potentially it might make it easier for you to go in deeper in the actual meat of the
Mhm.
conversations, if I'm not mistaken.
For sure. And one thing that kind of mentioned based off your response there is that Tim Ferriss calls them attention units, and you only have so many AUs
Yep.
every day. And
Yep.
if
Yep.
you spend it too much, it makes it hard. And then one thing I was actually wanting to mention earlier is that when it comes to my original series, the Omni content and the Polymath Polycast, I approached it in a way of trying to create a template. So I mentioned the template for the Polycast, but for the Omni content, I based it off of 2 TED Talks, which I'll try to send to you afterwards if you like. One of them, which most people have seen, is Start With Why, Simon Sinek. Great one, talks about the why of what you're doing, then how you do it, and then what it actually is. And I try to structure my format in that order. But then the other one is a little bit more interesting. It's like the magic of storytelling. And this guy talks about how all the neurochemicals, how you respond to fear and suspense and laughter and just kind of feeling love in a way. If you can inspire those emotions in people, it makes the act of that storytelling much more impactful
I
and
love
making that
that.
actual particular content way more powerful and viral capable too.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I would love if you can share those on, because I think that could be very insightful. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Now, let's approach this next one kind of in a rapid fire sense, since there's so many of them. You'll understand what I mean in a second. But it seems that Tribetactics has a couple original series of its own, or actually a few. Actually, I would like to ask about them. First off, what started the original series Academy?
Yeah, great question. Okay, you know, we are in the business of helping companies like create their own shows, but we always like to put some focus on our own shows. And to be honest with you, I think that we could, like, we have so much more ideas. We just need to get around to doing them, and time managing, like with everything, with all the other shows. But yeah, to answer your question, Original Series Academy was basically an ode to HubSpot Academy, in the sense that, like, hey, like, how do we create like a place where we can just share you know, educational and hopefully, you know, entertaining content on like the different pillars or like aspects of creating your own original series. And we use this terminology of original series very deliberately, because we do want people to think of, to get, you know, to think of like, you know, Netflix, HBO, so on and so forth. We really want them to think of themselves as a director for their business in this case,
Yeah.
like a film director for their business in this case. So yeah, that's the point of original series, something that's a bit more educational, so that people can get practical knowledge out of it.
Yeah, and the Academy is really good too, by the way. And additionally, you had Spare Room Talks, an
Yeah.
audio original series that you experimented with. How was that
Mhm.
developing there?
Yeah, so that's I have a good story for that one. So that was our very first show. I don't think it was produced very well, because we were literally just like starting out. So we couldn't afford any cameras. Like, we just had like 2 smartphones
Oh,
as cameras, and the smartphones didn't even match. Like, one was like an Android, and the other one was an Android as well, but it was like totally like way
yeah.
better or way worse, something like that. And yeah, basically I was talking to my wife, and I was like, hey, we have a spare room in the apartment. How do I want to turn that into like a podcast studio type space, and make it look like super, you know, like professional corporate. So what do you think we should call the show? And she's like, oh, well, why do you want to do that? I'm like, oh, well, you know, we want people to take it seriously. Like, we want to be like, you know, corporate, you know, like professional.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, why don't you just tell the truth? I'm like, oh, well, I don't want to hide anything. I just want to go for a certain look. And she said, well, why don't you just document, like, speaking of document versus create, why don't you just call it what it is? And hey, like, you guys are on a journey. Like, surely things will get, you know, whatever, like, better with time, more sophisticated with time.
Yeah.
And so that's where the name Spare Room Talks came from, because it really was a spare room.
Yeah.
We like, I think we gave away the bed for free, and we just got like 2 desks from IKEA, and we kind of like put it up in that way. And yeah, it was quite good. So that's how we came across it. And it was just a show to interview yeah, like founders and business owners and just
Get
notable
started.
people on yeah, exactly, on what they've learned on their journey so far. So
Yeah.
very, very general, and we've learned a lot since then, you know.
For sure. And I didn't even realize it was smartphone cameras when I was watching them too. So that's really cool. I think it's interesting too, because people don't necessarily notice those things. I'm a techie. I usually notice quality pretty well, but the way that the show was set up and the angles that you had already put, you had professional angles, you had professional desks, you had that kind of professional atmosphere. Even though it was a spare room, you
Yep.
worked hard at making it look really good. And I think that if you do that, it doesn't matter if you're using a phone or a $10,000 camera.
100%, man. And it gave us so much confidence to then recommend to people, especially like startups and stuff like that, or anyone just wanting to pilot something.
Mm.
We always recommend like smartphones to start off, because like we have the cameras and all that stuff, but like to tell you the truth, it's exactly what you said. Like if you have it, great. If you don't have it, that's fine, because like all of us have like amazing cameras, like, right, like in
Yeah.
our
4K, 30
yeah,
FPS there. Yeah.
yeah, you know what I mean. So like it's so much like mine's not even 4K, mine is just like 1080p max, but like even that is like
Oh yeah.
very, very sufficient to like just get the ball rolling. Yeah.
It's better than what we're recording here. Zoom does like what 720p and then upscales it to 1080. It's like it's crazy. And so
Yeah.
and then the other one is, what is the series warm intro about?
Ooh, okay. The warm intro. It's currently on pause, but we hope. I mean, we'll see if we'll come back to it. But it was a show that we've done. We've published 2 episodes of so far. It was basically inspired by how, like, many times, you know, me and others as well, like in my network, either I would reach out to someone like, "Hey, Dustin, I see you're connected with so and so. Can you give me a warm intro to them?" Or someone else would be like, "Hey, Kareem, you're connected with so and so. Can you introduce us as such?" It was kind of like a play on like LinkedIn culture, if you will.
That's
And
funny.
we thought, why don't we get like proper, you know, people that have like amazing stories. In Dublin, it was very much like Dublin, Ireland focused, because Dublin is kind of like, Dublin is pretty much becoming the Silicon Valley of
Yeah.
Europe, if you will. And so we're fortunate in the sense that there's a lot of really cool stories happening right here. So, you know, why look elsewhere? Like, let's just do something for the community. And that's kind of how it started. So we got like, the first guest was somebody who, you know, his first startup was like sold to Stripe, like not very long ago, and how, you know, that almost happened, like how they just, like, you know, put their head down and got to work, and this almost happened by chance, but also like they very much so deserve that. So just like learning that story and how
Mhm.
they were very close to giving up and all that. So we're giving you a warm intro to that person, if you like. And then the second person was basically a serial entrepreneur, and they had like a really big company, like in the hundreds, but then they moved on from that and they went back to zero to build a brand new startup because they came up with something better. And he was talking about how, you know, he enjoys challenges, and he never gets stressed. Like he finds,
Yeah.
he welcomes the challenges of building a business from scratch, so much so that he would leave a company that he's helped build to like, from like X all the way to like a few hundred employees. Like you've made it, so to speak. One would argue that you should just stick with that, but he managed to go back and start from scratch again. So
It's more
it was a really good
exhilarating.
what's that?
More exhilarating for him, I guess.
Yeah, exactly, which was so rock and roll for us, like to see someone do that. It's kind of like you're about to finish the race, but you just get such a kick out of it that you purposely walk all the way back to the starting line and do it again.
Mhm.
Very inspiring. But yeah, that was kind of like the point of the show. As it turned out, we just paused for a little bit, you know, and we're exploring other show ideas, and that's something that we learned as well, Dustin. Like that, like once you start a show, there is no pressure. Like you're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to take breaks. You're allowed to, yeah, you're allowed to change your mind. Gary Vee actually put out an amazing piece of content around it. You may have come across it, called, it's one of like his original films that they put out, and it was just talking about the topic of changing your mind, and how who comes across as like someone who's like always right, like very assertive, like all the right moves, how he himself has actually changed his mind like so many times. And it's being flexible, it's being willing to have no ego, and change your mind. That's actually what helps you to pivot your way to success, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
definitely. And just can't keep going down these rapid fire questions too, real quick, because I see I have a few more to ask about because you have so many different series. I wanted to try to touch on all of them because I felt that like having this diversification of different series that you have for Tribetactics and even your own personal brand too is kind of this polymathic idea too. You're trying different things and trying to explore the different avenues in a way. So on your own channel, you started the Get Culture series. What is that? What's the goal for that one?
Oh my God, that's another one that was also discontinued. But
Most
yeah,
of these are, I think.
yeah, I think the with the Get Cultured series, the idea for it was that we would almost do, and we might bring it back under like a new light. But the idea for it was basically to do a reaction series to other companies' shows, just to shed light on the few, I have to mention, like just a few companies that are really doing an amazing job at creating shows, and kind of like, deconstructing them and why we believe their shows were great, and what
Mm.
you, the audience member, could learn from that and maybe apply to your own series. And so it was like a bit of like, yeah, that's why we called it like Get Cultured, like it's just,
Yeah.
hey, like marketing changed, like you got to get cultured, that was kind of the
Yeah.
idea behind it. It's a bit stupid, but like we
Something
believed in
else
it,
is
and we
nice.
might, yeah, we might come back to it, we'll see.
Yeah, that's cool. And so then kind of pivoting to a more traditional question, I guess you could say, is what was the inspiration behind the name of your company?
Great question. The real answer is that we couldn't think of anything better. Right now, I'm very grateful that it's starting very slowly to be a memorable name, or like people are like, oh, I've heard of it, or what have you. Even like outside Dublin, Ireland, like all the way from like, I don't know, from like the US all the way to like Australia and several parts in between. We always get surprised by nice stories of how people came across us. But like the name, the nerdy kind of like story behind it is that it was based on a book that I really loved, by Seth Godin. I've read like almost all of his books. I've certainly read all the most important ones,
Mhm.
and one of them was a book he published, I think, in 2000. I'm gonna butcher this now. It was either 2005, 2006, or 2011.
It's a
One
while
of
back,
those.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it might be 2011. But it was a book called Tribes, and he talks about like this concept of like, the subtitle of the book was like, we need you to lead us, and this notion that people actually enjoy having a leader. It's great. It's actually a bit of a relief that you have someone trusted that you can follow, and they will lead you to something. I mean, there's so many people that I follow that I'm part of their tribe, so to speak. But I just loved, the concept of a tribe, and what constitutes a tribe, and how it's not so much like bunch of followers following a leader. It's a lot more dynamic than that. It's like followers
Yeah.
like getting inspiration from each other. It's the leader sometimes like going back to the followers for insight before making their next decision. And it just captured, like, to me, it made me feel like, wow, I bet that's what all companies are trying to do. They're trying to have, I don't think cult is the best word, but like a tribe,
Yeah.
like a secret handshake, or like a group that does things a certain way. Or as Seth Godin would say, like, people like us do things like this. And I thought that would be pretty cool if we do a company that helps people get that.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the name behind the story behind the name.
Well, yeah, that's perfect, and I think that it's interesting too because when I saw your name, I thought of that book, and so there's actually an
Oh, nice.
interesting interview by Seth Godin and the team from The Future, which is a YouTube channel for design. You might check that out. I think it was
Mhm.
pretty decently recent. And what's interesting is that being a marketer, being a content creator, we want to build a tribe around our content because that's how things really grow, and it's how we really can make a difference.
Mhm.
And that's why I call the people watching the show the innovators, because that's who I'm trying to appeal to, the people who are entrepreneurial, polymathic, and people who want to make a change.
Yeah.
And so I think that is really interesting too. And there's actually a tool called Tribe.so where you can make your own community. And I think they set off that same idea of just trying to build a tribe of people. So it's really interesting.
100%. Yeah. It's no, it's an awesome concept in general. Yeah.
So I find that marketers and entrepreneurs are quite interdisciplinary, and which means they make a good fit for a show like yourself. So what divergent skills do you have?
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I think that I have a concept for you that I think you're really gonna love, man.
Hmm.
And it's something that changed my whole freaking life, like, recently. So it's this coach, like a business coach, a guy called Dan Sullivan. I think he's supremely underrated for what he has achieved and who he has helped coach. He's coached like a lot of like famous authors and things like that. And he has many, many concepts. He's published over like 20 books. But the one concept by far, like by a mile, that resonated with me is something called who, not how. And he says like ambitious people, right? Say, you know, whatever, like, you know, me, you, whoever, we naturally have goals, things that we're trying to achieve. But, you know, we think we naturally, right, start with setting a goal, and then we ask, okay, well, how do we achieve this goal? It's a very innocent, very natural question. And he sheds light on how this is actually how schools teach you to think as well. It's like, how do you solve this piece of homework? Or like, how do you learn this new skill, right? Or when you go on to like a corporate job or whatever, hey, here's how to complete your job, right? Here are the steps. And he says, this gets, you hit your ceiling very, very quickly. And he suggests, why don't you, rather than asking how, why don't you ask who? So if I want to build a podcast, for example, I could say, right, how am I going to do this? And go on like an insane journey, and maybe God knows how long like the learning curve would be. Or I can find the who. Maybe in this case it's you, and I could just come to you as an expert, someone who has a lot of experience in this, and be like, hey, this is my goal, can you help me, you know, achieve this goal? And you tap into other who's, so to speak. So going back to your original question, so this, first of all, this is something that I'm living by recently, which is like who, not how. I try to force myself to not do something if I can tap into someone who can actually do that better. You know, and so for example, like Chopcast, like an AI platform that we've recently almost finished. It's not launched yet. Like I could have learned how to code, and it's like, good luck, right? Like I'll probably have something ready in 10 years, or I can tap into a team that's maybe been there and done that and find a way to work with them, which is what we did, you know. But like for me, like I think I just like to be good at like noticing things. I like to use that as a way to find creative ideas as well. And I love that once I have a creative idea, I like to think I'm good at finding people who can execute on them. So I like to think of myself as like a super connector in that regard. But beyond that, like I have a bad habit of like when I want something done, I try my best to like learn how to do it, which is fine. But in the same time, you can only get to a certain limit. Like if this is extremely important for you, at least the philosophy that I'm adopting right now is, okay, how do you get good at explaining things, but not so much like doing it, just explaining the actual goal and tapping into other people who could be your who, as opposed to you forcing the how when you're not really you know, it's not necessarily like your natural mode, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, and kind of, it's interesting that you mentioned superconnector, because that was the topic of one of my earlier podcast interviews. And one thing I think is fascinating is that the reason why I love the polymath concept so much is that not only are these people, like a specialist is someone you would have, like if you want to find someone like a who, I'm a swim instructor, I'm a specialist in swimming. I am someone that if you want to learn how to swim, you're going to come to me. That's the who. But as someone who's a polymath, like if let's say they're swimming, they're nuclear physicist and something else too, they have just the divergent skill sets. That is a who that you could approach for a much more niche, or even, I guess you could even say, interdisciplinary reason. And so that's the kind of like who you would need to go for someone. And I think the idea of a superconnector isn't just someone who can connect you with people, but someone like a polymath who can connect different skill sets and help you. They'll be that who for you to help get an innovative result, I guess you could say.
100%, man. Yeah, and the who could also be like a tool or a piece of tech that you use. But the idea is that, I think we're both like, I think what we're both saying is synonymous really with one another, in the sense that it's really about, trying to find ways to work in a smart and productive way, and also to recognize the compound effect of combining different skills that, together create something greater than, the individual parts by themselves.
Definitely. And so we're running low on time here, so I only have a couple more questions. One of which is something I ask all my guests is, what is a polymath to you?
Yeah, I think that's what a polymath is to me. I think is somebody who can take skill A and skill B and come up with a way to create something new that is greater than those two individually, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so the next thing I was going to ask was I just recently finished a book. It takes for me forever to finally read. Like I can make a habit of reading, but actually finishing a book is something I've had a hard time with. And I made sure I finished it like over this past weekend here to make sure I'm done in
Thank you.
time to have with you. And I think it was really interesting too, because it wasn't hard for me to read. It was one of those books that was made well. And like you were mentioned earlier, you made it in parts. I'm writing a book too. And I did the same thing where I'm making it in parts.
Amazing.
So it's
Yeah.
interesting how it's the same idea process. So I like the result of it. What do you think really is important about the book, and what do you want to share about it?
Yeah, so I guess like the whole point of the book is to just introduce this really exciting concept, in my biased opinion,
Yeah,
that if you have a business, you should have a show, and it's completely free to build your own show, and it could be very exciting because if you work in, I don't know, like construction or finance or like tech or any other industry that you can think of, I'm willing to bet that like I bet you that like others in your space aren't thinking in terms of like how do we create like a Netflix style kind of show for our business.
definitely.
And Netflix style is just a way to spark inspiration and excitement. It doesn't mean that you need to go and hire like a crew of like 10, 20 people to get something insane together.
Yeah,
Of course, if you have that, like by all means go for it, but it could also be just as simple as having or as minimalist as having what we're having right now, which is essentially a talk show like that's done via Zoom.
yeah,
This is something that a lot of people, that everyone pretty much like has access to, and and it's not so much about the technology as much as it is about the different ideas that you could do. For example, if you and I were to watch something together using Zoom, and we
mm,
can both react to it, and that can become like a reaction show. Or if you and I were to do a show together, starting with one golden question, and then we set off on an adventure to find answers for this question. On our way, crossing paths with different people who've kind of like been there, done that, and just other people who can share insights with us, so that by the time we get to, let's say, the season finale, or like that, whatever the final episode would be, we come up with very interesting conclusions. So there's a lot of different ways that you could create a show, and hopefully this book will shed some light on that.
yeah, definitely. And one kind of thing I kept thinking about when I was reading is that I was thinking about different ideas for different shows.
Yeah.
And I want to go into gaming live streaming down the line. I streamed a little bit on Twitch, but not much. And I had this
Nice.
idea of like, there's this concept called dual play. When you're sitting there with someone, you may not be playing together, but you could be playing side by side. What if I was to stream with someone else, both of us playing a single player game, but having a discussion over Discord and recording that and presenting that to the people, and just kind of have a nice conversation and talking about things in the game or something, life, and just whatever kind of thing, making a series out of it. I think it'd be really cool.
I think you might be onto something there. That
Yeah.
sounds like an awesome idea.
Thank you. And so obviously we're running out of time here. I want to keep asking questions, so I'll probably try to sneak you on again if we can, something like that. But thank you for
Yeah,
coming
I'd
on the
be honored.
show. This has been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dustin, for the opportunity. I really appreciate being on the show, and hopefully it was valuable to
For
people
sure.
tuning in.
Oh, and then to wrap up, where can people find you online?
Yeah, so they can just search for Kareem Mostafa on LinkedIn, or our company website is tribetactics.com. I'm usually the guy on the chat these days, so that's another creative way to reach me, I guess.
Yeah, that's how I got to you actually the first time a while back. And then
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we've been connected ever since. Yeah.
I immediately added you, I think, right after that call too. And it was interesting because I'll make sure I have links to the description for people. And then what, besides obviously checking out the cool site and eventually Chopcast when it comes out and getting the awesome book, what could be the call to action for the audience today?
Come up with a show. It's free.
Mm. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Dustin.